All right, Pastor Steve, I have this for you. It says this: when the Bible says to take care of the poor, orphans, and widows, what does that exactly mean? Are we supposed to give them money or a place to live? How long does that go for, or what does that all entail?
Well, when you were first off, I came from a background where my family off and on was on welfare, and so there are poor people, and then there are poor people, and so what we talk about as being poor in the United States, many times I can tell you from my family dynamic, it was not poor, it was bad decisions, and it was laziness.
Yeah.
That was the situation. And so I'm not saying that we don't help people out like that, but I think that our whole welfare system just takes and cements people into a lifestyle that is just counterproductive to families and counterproductive to ever having any kind of prosperity. Prosperity comes from going out and working and having a normal job and over years being able to add to your wealth, and your family gets blessed by that, and that's what the Bible teaches, and that's what the government should be promoting. And unfortunately, what happens is, again, in my situation, in my family, it was welfare was just a situation where it was a fallback when bad decisions were being made, and you didn't have to bear the consequences, or you didn't have to even think about bearing the consequences, because you always knew that the government would pay for you. And so that is not a good thing. As far as what we're supposed to do with people, even with that in mind, as a Christian, what I do is I have a tendency to err on the side of grace. And so when I came from Southern California, a lot of junk in Southern California. We're getting more of that here. We have a lot of people who are have substance abuse issues. They're alcoholics or they're addicts, and I never give people money in that sense. Even people who come into church, we don't just hand money out to them. If they want to come, and a lot of times we'll have them do some things around the church to see if they're for real and that kind of stuff, and then help them out, and paying bills, that kind of thing. We don't just hand them cash for obvious reasons. You hand somebody cash, they go out and they spend it on drugs or alcohol and that kind of stuff. It just makes their life worse. And so I have had people live in my home. The Bible talks about in the book of Hebrews in chapter 13 that we need to make sure that we entertain strangers, because in doing so there have been people who have entertained angels without knowing it. I'm going to look up the reference to that. That is in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. And so we need to be helping people out in that kind of instance. I've had lots of situations over the years where guys have gotten themselves into bad situations financially. Girls too have gotten themselves into bad situations financially, and I've let them stay with me for a period of time, and until they could get back on their feet, and then they need to go out and get a job or do whatever needs to happen. I've never had any problems with the ladies. Almost every one of the guys I've ever had live at my house, I've had to kick them out. Yeah. And there were bad feelings at the end of the whole thing, and it's because of the difference in attitude. Not everyone. I've had some guys that were just really godly guys, and they just needed a little help at times. And so, that's the deal. The Bible says that we need to be taking care of the poor. And so if I see somebody who's down on their luck and that kind of thing, there are some times when I can do something that's more substantial, like letting somebody stay at my house. And there's some times when it's just a matter of, hey, you say you're hungry, I'll buy you something, and go and get them something to eat. And for the most part. Actually, it's probably about 50-50 on that. When I've told people I'll buy them something to eat, the guys who are out there scamming just go no, and the guys who are really hungry, they'll go with me to McDonald's or whatever, and we'll go take care of that. So I think that needs to be happening. When people come in to get help here at Calvary, we have them talk with a pastor about their financial situation and why they're in it. Because just throwing money at a problem doesn't help the problem if they're making bad decisions.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if it has to do with sin specifically, those things need to get taken care of. And if you take care of them, then life turns around and it becomes this awesome thing. And so what we want to do is help people, not just give them handouts. So
I was this last weekend I was in Spokane for my sister's wedding, and one of the things that was prominent walking down the street was that you'd have, like being around the Davenport, you'd have these guys in full business suits, driving nice cars, and combined with a lot of homeless people, and then, just grungy dudes riding BMX bikes and stuff like that. And you can see like just this massive difference in social status, like living right in next to each other. Seattle and San Francisco and all that stuff are starting to have a big feud about this. About the homeless situation, and I'm sure people that are in the know about Amazon stop building a building because of a head tax that has to relate with this. But it all comes down to basic philosophy, and that's how do you help the poor. Right. And from a certain political perspective, it's that you give them welfare and money, and you just provide for all their needs by taxing people, or you and me that work and stuff like that. But is that really helping them? Yeah. The whole idea in the Bible about helping somebody, I wish people would just, tour the county jail and stuff. I guess the last point that I'll make is that you'll see like videos on Facebook. Well, they'll have a guy, the one I saw, he'd have this really nice dressed guy on crutches, and he would fall over in the middle of the streets, and they'd film all the people helping him up. Then they had a guy dressed like a bum in crutches fall over in the streets, and no one would help him. And then the tone of the video was, don't judge someone on the outside. You should love everybody. And you could tell everybody that lived in like New York or something, because they all posted, well, yeah, but we live with those people, and most of them, 90% of them are alcoholics, and they're scammers. So you go to help them, and they'll either rob you, or they'll ask you for money, or this and that. And a lot of people, out of the goodness of their heart that want to help people, don't know how to get past the manipulation in the human heart that just wants to take advantage of you to support their drug habit.
Right.
So it all comes down to really helping them, like you said, either in their sin or finances, or whatever it is, not just throwing money at them because out of love or whatever. Yeah. It's naivety.
Yeah, you know what? The government did not do anything good for my family. Not one penny of government welfare did any good for my family. In fact, it was counterproductive the whole time. The church is much better at helping the poor. Because again, when you're talking about people coming into a church to get help, we're going to talk to them about their issues. We're going to talk to them about why they're in the place that they're in, and people will go, well, that's judgmental, and you want to convert them? Yes, absolutely. That is exactly what it is. They need to be converted. They need Jesus in their life. They need to have a normal life. And a welfare social worker is not looking for that. And so, for the most part, I know that we have some Christians that are involved in the social system, and so I love it that they're there.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that is not what the world is doing. And basically, what's happening with a major portion of the United States is they have abdicated their responsibility to the poor because they think that they pay taxes. And so the government should be handling it. Since when has the government handled anything well? We've had, I don't know if you remember this, but in the 60s, well, you wouldn't know about it in the 60s, but Johnson declared a war on poverty. And they started literally throwing money at the whole poverty issue in the United States in the late 60s, in about 67 or so.
With social programs or what?
With social programs. That's where the whole welfare system came from. And so how are we doing? How's it going? And obviously it's a fiasco.
Yeah.
It's been a train wreck. And, literally, if you took all the money that was spent on the war on poverty and just gave it to people, instead of having government bureaucracies. It's just billions and billions of dollars that have gone to this thing. And what it's done is destroyed whole cultures, destroyed families, it has not been a good thing. And so the government does not do it well. And so one of the problems that we have is that we've abdicated our responsibility to the United States government, and I don't think that that's a good solution. If my mom had, if the only options for my family when I was growing up, as far as welfare went, was going to Christians and going to the church, there would have been different decisions. There would have been different decisions. But the fact that they could go to a place where not only was their behavior not judged, in the sense of people talk to them about, hey, this is probably not a good idea. Maybe you should work on your marriage instead of walking away. Mm-hmm. If that had been the case, life would have been much better for all of us, and that was not the case. And so bad behavior was supported, like literally supported by tax dollars. And so not a good idea.
So we talked a lot about the poor for orphans and widows, and I know we have dozens and dozens of families here at Calvary that have adopted kids and stuff like that. Orphans to me is a little bit easier to understand because they're a little bit more innocent. Mm-hmm. But as far as widowers, is there a cultural difference between like a widower back then, like not basically her husband was a provider, he gets, dies or whatever, and now she's left with nothing, different than what we have in our society today, or what does orphans and widows mean?
Yeah, when you're talking about orphans, you're talking about kids who've lost their parents, and they're street kids. Mm-hmm. And you can go to any third world country and you can see street kids. Mm-hmm. They're poor. Yeah. And some of them are scammers too. When I've been to different countries, gypsies are known for this in the sense that you have groups that send their kids out to go and get money and that kind of thing. But it doesn't mean that you don't buy a kid a churro, or something. And so you just love people, and so I think that's important. And obviously there are children who are in bad situations. I know some people in our fellowship that have adopted kids out of the foster care system. You're a Christian and you've got money and you have a house and you have the ability. We have a bunch of kids in our area that need help. And they're in the foster care system, and a lot of times that just becomes another one of those scam situations where people are involved in foster care because the government will hand money to them to watch a kid until they're 18.
It's true. And
the kids are, basically the kids are in those homes because it pays to have them in the homes. Mm-hmm. It would be a better thing for Christians to be going out and ministering to little kids like that. You can change their life. Mm-hmm. And so I know a number of little kids in our church, that just have been growing up in ridiculously awful situations. And because people in our church were involved in foster care and got a hold of them and ultimately adopted them, changed their lives radically. Yeah. Makes me want to cry. And sometimes when I see the kids, because he changed their lives radically. And so there's a lot of things that we can do as Christians that will just be things that you will be honored by God for at the throne of judgment. And so orphans, that's good stuff. When you're talking about widows back in ancient times, obviously the men were the providers, and so when a woman's husband died, then she didn't have the ability to take care of herself, and many times widows would be forced literally into prostitution. They would feel like they had no other place to go. A real widow, Paul talks about it in Timothy. He talks about the fact that when we're supporting widows, we need to be supporting widows who are widows indeed. And this is how he says this. Honor widows who are really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. Now she who is really a widow and left alone trusts in God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day but she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. That's talking about sensual pleasure. And these things command that they may be blameless. But if anyone does not provide for his own, especially for those of his household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number. And apparently they had a group of widows that they were taking care of. And not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported for good works, if she has brought up children, if she's lodged strangers, if she's washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. But refuse the younger widows, for when they begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry. And the passage goes on. And so they had a welfare system in the church, at least in the church at Ephesus. And what Paul says is that the first line of defense against poverty is the family. And so the family should be taking care of a widow. So in the context of the Bible, a widow is not just somebody who's lost their husband. A widow is somebody who's lost their husband and has no family to take care of her. And that's one of the things that we keep in mind. So when somebody comes in looking for help, we ask, do you have family? Do you have family in the area? Are they willing to help you? And if not, why not? And a lot of times that's where we're getting into issues that have come up. There are a lot of people who've burnt bridges because of alcoholism and addiction and that kind of thing. Doesn't mean that we won't help them, but those problems need to be taken care of because the family should be doing something about this, and not the government, and not that kind of thing. It needs to be when you're talking about being Christians, it needs to be the family that takes care of these things, and so the fact that the government has programs for my parents does not mean that I get to abdicate my responsibility in that area. I need to be taking care of the people in my family. And so Paul says if you have a widow who's really a widow, unable to remarry, unable to take care of herself on any level, then those are the ones that you want to be ministering to, that you want to be helping out. Otherwise, what's happening is you're taking away from tithe money, and that's what we deal with as a church. You're taking away from tithe money, and you're taking it and giving it to people who don't actually need it, because they have other options, and you are limiting what you can do for people who actually do need it. And so again, it's something to keep in mind whether you're in the first century or you're in the 21st century. Those are issues that need to be considered. And so, yeah. Same thing, had a question here about widowers, and it would be the same thing. If I was talking to a man who was destitute, and one of the first things I would be asking him in a situation like this is, where's your family? What's happening with that? And again, can they help you? And if not, why not? What's happening there? And then try to actually help the man is what you want to do. So,
Amen.
yeah.
Good on that.